I stood in his office with a pregnancy test in my trembling hand and watched Dante Calvetti's face turn to stone. The man I had let touch me in the dark, the man whose blood I had cleaned off marble. Floors for 2 years looked at me like I was something he needed to scrape off his shoe. "Get out," he said. Not loudly, not with anger. Just 2 words, flat and final, like closing a door on a room he never wanted to see again. This is the story of Sophia Reyes, a maid who thought she was invisible, and Dante Calvetti, a mafia boss who believed power meant control. What you are about to hear is going to shock you. Kindly hit the subscribe button and let me know where you are watching from. Stay with me, because the final twist is something nobody could have predicted, not even Dante himself. This is the story of how a single hospital test destroyed an empire, and it all started the moment he told me to disappear. I was 23 years old and undocumented when I started working at the Calvetti estate in Bergen County, New Jersey. One of 12 housekeepers who scrubbed blood out of expensive rugs and pretended not to hear the conversations that happened behind closed doors. I knew which rooms Dante used for business. I knew the sound of his voice when he was angry, cold, and precise, like a blade sliding between ribs. I knew better than to make eye contact when he walked past me in the hallway, his handmade suits worth more than everything my mother owned. Dante Calvetti was 36, untouchable and bored with everything except control. I was nobody, less than nobody. The kind of invisible that lets you survive in a world built on violence and silence. Until the night he found me crying in the kitchen after midnight. My mother's medical bills had doubled. The surgery she needed cost more than I would make in 5 years. I was desperate and stupid and terrified, and I didn't hear him come in. He didn't ask if I was okay. He asked what I wanted. I said security. He said, "Nothing is free." What started as a transaction, her silence for his protection. One reckless night she told herself meant nothing became 3 months of secret encounters in rooms I used to clean. He never kissed me. Never asked my name until the 4th time. But he watched me with something I didn't understand then. Something darker than desire. Possession. An obsession with the only thing in his empire he didn't already control. Someone who feared him but didn't need him. Not yet. Then I missed my period. The test came back positive on a Tuesday morning in the staff bathroom. I stared at those 2 pink lines and felt my entire world tilt sideways. I told him on Wednesday afternoon, waiting until he was alone in his office, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the test. By Thursday morning I was fired. Not just dismissed. Erased. Dante stood behind his desk, flanked by his consigliere Anthony and his head of security Marco, and told me I had 1 hour to leave the property. No severance. No reference. No proof I had ever existed in his world. When I said the word pregnant, he looked at me like I had tried to steal from him. "I don't know what you think this is," he said, his voice so calm it made my skin crawl, "but you're not the first woman to lie to keep a roof over her head." His lawyer, a thin man with expensive glasses and cold eyes, slid a document across the desk. A non-disclosure agreement and a single check for $5,000. Sign, leave, disappear. I stared at the paper, at the man I thought I had known in the dark, and saw only a stranger who needed me gone. The check sat there between us like an insult. $5,000 for 3 months of my body, for a baby he didn't believe was his, for my silence about everything I had seen and heard in his house. I should have signed it. I should have taken the money and run. But I was in shock, frozen, unable to make my hand move. The lawyer tapped the paper with one manicured finger. "You have 58 minutes, Miss Reyes." I looked at Dante one last time. He wasn't even watching me anymore. He had already dismissed me from his mind, turned back to whatever empire business mattered more than the girl he had destroyed. I walked out with nothing. 2 weeks later, I collapsed at the Port Authority bus station in Manhattan. I had been trying to get to a clinic in Queens somewhere cheap that might see me. Without insurance, but the room started spinning and the ground came up to meet me. And I woke up in an ambulance with a paramedic asking me questions I couldn't answer. The emergency room at Bellevue Hospital smelled like disinfectant and fear. They told me I was 12 weeks pregnant and severely anemic. Dangerously anemic. The kind of anemic that meant the baby was taking everything I had left, and I had nothing left to give. They hooked me up to an A4 and took what felt like a dozen vials of blood and told me to rest. I lay in that narrow bed with cheap curtains around me and tried not to think about how I was going to pay for any of this. That is when everything changed. The first nurse frowned at my chart. Then she called a second nurse. Then a supervising physician appeared at the foot of my bed with an expression I could not read. "We need to run additional tests," he said carefully. "Your blood type is showing some irregularities we need to clarify for the safety of your pregnancy." I did not understand. What kind of irregularities? He did not explain, just ordered more vials drawn, more tests run. I waited alone in that curtained space, listening to the sounds of the emergency room around me, and tried not to panic. Have you ever been in a hospital bed alone, waiting for test results that might change everything? That feeling of helplessness, of being at the mercy of systems you don't understand. That was me. Powerless. Terrified. Still believing I was nobody. The results came back the next morning, flagged in the hospital's genetic database. A mandatory cross-reference system implemented 3 years earlier after a high-profile organ trafficking case that had made national news. The system was designed to catch illegal organ harvesting, to trace biological connections that might indicate black market activity. It scanned genetic markers in every blood sample processed through New York and New Jersey hospitals and flagged matches automatically. My blood type was AB negative, rare but not unheard of. What made the system lock with the genetic markers? Specific, traceable familial markers that matched exactly one other entry in the state medical records. Dante Calvetti, age 36, registered donor after a motorcycle accident when he was 26 that had required an emergency transfusion. But that was not the problem. The problem was the second match. A pediatric entry 8 years old filed under patient Marcos Calvetti, age 7, son of Dante Calvetti. The system had identified a paternity probability of 99.7% between my unborn child and Marcos Calvetti, which meant my baby was not just Dante's child. It was medical, legal, undeniable proof that Dante Calvetti had fathered 2 children. And I had no idea why that mattered. Not yet. The hospital social worker appeared that afternoon, a tired woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a clipboard. "Miss Reyes," she said, sitting in the plastic chair beside my bed. "You are listed as a potential match for a minor dependent in our state records. I need to notify his legal guardian. It is protocol." I stared at her. I tried to explain. Tried to say I wanted nothing, that I would leave, that I would disappear like he had demanded. But she shook her head. "The report has already been generated," she said gently. "It is automatic. There is nothing I can do." The notification went out to Dante Calvetti's lawyer at 9:47 that morning. By noon, Dante was standing in my hospital room. He looked different. Still perfectly dressed, still cold and controlled, but something had shifted in his eyes. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not the maid. Not the mistake. The trap he had walked into himself. "You know what you have done," he said quietly, and I shook my head because I knew nothing. I knew nothing about wills or blood trusts or the control he was about to lose. But he told me anyway. Had to tell me, because I was the only other person who needed to understand how completely I had just destroyed his world. "Where are you watching from right now? Are you somewhere safe, or are you listening to this in the dark, alone, the way Sophia was in that hospital room?" Because what Dante told her next changed everything. Subscribe if you have not already, because this story is going somewhere you will not expect. Somewhere dark and dangerous and absolutely unforgettable. "My father," Dante said, pacing the small hospital room like a caged animal, wrote his will with one rule. One ironclad rule designed to prevent the kind of fractured bloodline wars that destroyed other families. If the heir meaning me produces a second blood child by any woman, the entire estate transfers into an irrevocable trust. Not to me. Not to my captains. To both children managed jointly by court-appointed trustees until they reach age 25. He stopped pacing and looked at me with something I had never seen in his face before. Fear. "Do you understand what that means, Sophia?" I shook my head. "It means I spent 15 years making sure it could never happen. Every woman I touched signed an NDA with mandatory abortion clauses. Every housekeeper, every mistress, every one-night risk was covered, threatened, or paid off. Marcos was supposed to be the only child. The final child. The one who kept my control absolute. "But you did not sign," he said, and his voice cracked just slightly on those last words. "And now your blood is in a government system I cannot erase. Medical proof I cannot threaten away, cannot buy away, cannot make disappear." He sat down heavily in the chair the social worker had vacated. "Trustees will be appointed within 6 weeks. I will become a steward of my own empire. Every major decision subject to court review. Every move scrutinized by rival families who have spent decades waiting for me to slip." He looked at me with those dark eyes that had once made me feel wanted and now only showed me how much he hated what I represented. "Unless I can make this go away." "How much?" he asked. "How much do you want?" And for the first time since I had met Dante Calvetti, I held something more valuable than fear. I looked at the man who had thrown me away like trash 2 weeks earlier. The man who had told his lawyer I was a liar trying to trap him. The man who had made me feel like I was nothing, worse than nothing, something to be erased. And I said the only thing that made sense in that moment. "I do not want your money." His jaw tightened, the muscle jumping in his cheek the way it did when someone challenged him. "Then what do you want?" I did not answer right away, because I was beginning to understand what he had just handed me. Not a baby, not a scandal, a chain, one he had forged himself the moment he touched me. The moment he fired me without making me sign that paper, the moment his blood mixed with mine in a system he could not control. A chain I had not asked for but now held tight in my hands, wrapped around the throat of the man who thought he owned everything. "I want you to tell me," I said slowly, watching his face, "what happens if I keep this baby and do not sign anything?" The silence that followed was the sound of a kingdom cracking. Dante Calvetti had fired his pregnant maid to erase a problem, but the hospital had made me permanent. And now the only way he kept his empire was if he kept me close, controlled, carrying the one weapon he could not destroy. The maid he had discarded had become the mother of his second heir, and he had done it to himself. 3 days later, I was back at the Calvetti estate, not as a maid this time. Dante presented it as protection for me and the baby. A private wing in the east side of the mansion, the part of the house I had only ever cleaned, never inhabited. Medical care, security, everything I needed. He made it sound like generosity. But I knew the truth. He could not let me disappear, could not let me out of his sight, could not risk me talking to the wrong people or making the wrong decision or doing anything that might complicate the nightmare his life had become. So he brought me back, into his home, into his world, and told everyone it was the right thing to do. His staff looked at me differently now. Not invisible anymore, dangerous. The room they gave me was bigger than the apartment I had shared with 3 other girls in Union City. It had a 4-poster bed, and windows that overlooked the gardens and a bathroom with marble counters I used to scrub on my knees. I stood in the middle of that beautiful cage and understood exactly what this was. Not kindness. Control. Dante needed to manage the narrative. Manage me. Find some weakness he could exploit to make this problem go away. But I had learned something in that hospital room. I had learned that the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate someone you have dismissed as insignificant. And Dante had dismissed me completely. That first week back, I barely saw him. He was handling the fallout, meeting with lawyers and accountants and the trustees who had already been appointed by the court. I heard Anthony, his consigliere, shouting behind closed doors. Heard Marco giving orders to double security. Heard whispers from the staff about instability, about rival families circling, about the empire fracturing because the boss had made one stupid mistake with a maid. They did not say it to my face, but I heard it anyway. I was the mistake, the problem. The girl who had destroyed everything. But then Marcos came to visit. Dante's 7-year-old son from his ex-wife Elena. A woman from a rival crime family whose marriage to Dante had been annulled under circumstances no one talked about when the boy was 2. Marcos lived primarily with Elena's family in Brooklyn but spent weekends at the estate. He was a quiet child. Guarded, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's careful composure. The first time he saw me, he stopped in the doorway of the library where I was reading. "Are you the lady with the baby?" he asked. I nodded. "Is it my brother?" I hesitated, then nodded again. He considered this seriously, the way children do when they are trying to make sense of adult complications. "Okay," he said, and walked away. Simple as that. A 7-year-old accepting what his father could not. Dante found me an hour later. "Saw you met Marcos," he said, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. I nodded. "He is a good kid," I said quietly. Dante's expression flickered with something I could not name. "Complicated," he said. "His mother's family uses him as leverage. They file for increased custody every time I make a move they do not like. They would take him from me completely if they thought they could win." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw it. The fear underneath the control. Dante Calvetti, who ruled half of New Jersey through violence and intimidation, was terrified of losing his son. And now I was carrying another child who would split that vulnerability in two. The next few weeks fell into a strange rhythm. I lived in that beautiful wing of the mansion. Attended doctor's appointments with specialists Dante insisted on paying for, 8 meals prepared by a private chef. On the surface, it looked like I had won some kind of lottery, but the reality was darker. Dante watched me constantly. Not personally, he was too busy trying to hold his crumbling empire together, but through Marco and the security team. Cameras in the hallways, guards at the doors, my phone monitored, my internet access restricted. I was not a prisoner exactly, but I was not free either. I was an asset, a very valuable, very dangerous asset that needed to be controlled. And then the trustees arrived. 2 court-appointed financial managers and 1 family court mediator who would oversee the transition of power once my baby was born. They toured the estate, reviewed the books, asked questions that made Dante's captains nervous. I watched from my window as these strangers in business suits picked apart the empire Dante had spent his entire adult life building. Watched his face when they told him he could no longer make unilateral decisions about territory or investments or succession without their approval. Watched him realize that the life he had known was over, and it was all because of me, because of the baby growing inside me that he had tried to erase and could not. One of the trustees was a woman named Rebecca Chen, maybe 35, sharp and professional, with a law degree from Columbia and eyes that missed nothing. She asked to meet with me privately to ensure I understood my rights and the legal protections now in place. Dante did not want to allow it, but he had no choice. Rebecca sat across from me in the library and laid out exactly what my situation meant. "Your child will inherit equal shares of the Calvetti estate with Marcos," she said. "You will have legal guardianship and decision-making power until he or she turns 25. That means you have significant influence over one of the largest criminal enterprises on the East Coast. Do you understand that, Miss Reyes?" I nodded slowly. "Good," she said, "because there are a lot of people who are going to try to use you, including Dante Calvetti himself." That night, Dante came to my room for the first time since I had moved back in. He did not knock. Just walked in like he still owned every space I occupied. "Rebecca seems to like you," he said. I did not respond. He moved closer, and I could smell the whiskey on his breath, the cigarette smoke in his clothes. "You think you are safe now," he said quietly. "You think the courts and the trustees and the legal protections make you untouchable." I met his eyes. "I think you need me alive and compliant, or you lose everything." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You are right, which is why you are going to stay exactly where I can see you, doing exactly what I tell you, until I figure out how to fix this." I stood up, my hand instinctively moving to my stomach where the baby was just starting to show. "And if I do not?" I asked. "What are you going to do, Dante? Fire me again?" The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled too tight. He stared at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger exactly, something worse. Hunger, obsession. The realization that he could not threaten me the way he threatened everyone else. Could not make me disappear. Could not even touch me without risking everything. I was the one thing in his world he could not control, and it was destroying him. He left without another word. But I heard him in the hallway outside my door later that night, heard his footsteps pacing back and forth, heard him stop, start, stop again. He never knocked, never came back in. But he stood there for over an hour, and I lay in that massive bed in the dark, listening, understanding that something between us had shifted. This was not about the baby anymore. Not really. This was about power and obsession and the dangerous truth that we were now bound together in ways neither of us had chosen. Are you still with me? Are you listening alone, maybe late at night, wondering where this is going? Subscribe and let us keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. This story is far from over, because what happened next turned obsession into something far more dangerous. The pregnancy progressed. 14 weeks. 18 weeks. 22. My body changed in ways that made the situation impossible to ignore. Dante's child growing inside me, visible proof of what we had done, of what he could not undo. The household staff treated me with a strange mix of deference and resentment. I was not their boss, but I was not their equal either. I existed in some undefined space between servant and queen, and no one knew quite how to handle it, except Marcos. The boy visited every weekend and had started bringing me books, sitting in the library with me while I read, asking questions about the baby with the innocent curiosity of a child who did not understand how complicated his family had become. Dante watched us together with an expression I could not decipher. Sometimes it looked like relief that his son was adjusting. Sometimes it looked like fear. And sometimes, increasingly, it looked like something darker, like jealousy. Like he resented the easy connection Marcos and I had formed when he and his own son maintained such careful distance. One Saturday afternoon, Marcos fell asleep on the couch beside me, his head on my shoulder, completely trusting in that way only children can be. Dante found us like that, stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching. When Marcos woke up and ran off to find a snack, Dante stayed. "You are good with him," he said quietly. I shrugged. "He is a sweet kid. He deserves better than all this." Dante moved into the room, sat in the chair across from me. "He deserves a family that is not built on violence and paranoia," I added. Dante's jaw tightened. "You think I do not know that? You think I wanted this life for him, for either of them?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the exhaustion in his face. The weight of an empire he could not put down. "You could walk away," I said. He laughed bitterly. "No, Sophia, I really could not. Men like me do not retire. We die in power or we die in prison. There is no third option." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you brought children into this world," I said. His eyes flashed. "You think I planned this? You think I wanted to be trapped by a woman I fired?" I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Is that what I am to you, a trap?" He did not answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost defeated. "I do not know what you are to me anymore, and that is the problem." He left again, and I sat there feeling the baby move inside me, strong kicks that reminded me this was real. That in a few months there would be a child who needed me to navigate this impossible situation. A child who would inherit half of a criminal empire whether I wanted that or not. A child who would tie me to Dante Calvetti for the rest of my life. The threat started in my 6th month. Anonymous messages slipped under my door. Dead flowers left on my windowsill. Nothing overt enough to trigger security protocols, but enough to make me understand that not everyone wanted this baby born. Rival families who saw opportunity in Dante's weakness. Members of his own organization who resented the power shift. Even Elena's family who understood that another heir meant less for Marcos. Dante increased security. More guards, more cameras, more restrictions on where I could go and who I could see. The beautiful cage became smaller, and through it all he watched. Not just through his security team. Personally, I would catch him standing outside my room at night, see him in the gardens when I walked there in the afternoons, feel his eyes on me during the few dinners we were forced to share for appearances. Rebecca Chen noticed during one of her oversight visits. "He is obsessed with you," she said bluntly. "I know," I said. "Does that frighten you?" I thought about it. Yes, but not the way it should. She studied me with those sharp eyes. "Be careful, Miss Reyes. Men like Dante Calvetti do not love. They possess, they consume. Whatever he is feeling, it is not about you. It is about control." I nodded like I agreed. But I knew something Rebecca did not. Something I was only beginning to understand myself. Dante was not just obsessed with controlling me. He was obsessed with the fact that he could not. That I held his empire in my hands and there was nothing he could do about it. And that powerlessness was eating him alive in ways that looked increasingly like need. The baby came early. 36 weeks. My blood pressure had been climbing for days despite the medication, despite the bed rest, despite everything the doctors tried. They called it preeclampsia. Said if we waited any longer, I could have a seizure, could die, could lose the baby. Dante was in a meeting with his captains when my water broke. By the time he got to the hospital, I was already in labor, already surrounded by doctors and nurses and Rebecca Chen, who had been notified per protocol because this was the birth of a Calvetti heir. Dante looked terrified, actually terrified. Not the controlled mask he showed the world, but raw fear in his eyes when he saw me on that bed, in pain, vulnerable in ways I had not been since the night he first touched me. "Can I?" he started, then stopped. "Can I stay?" The doctor looked at me. "It is your choice, Miss Reyes." I should have said no. Should have made him wait outside, made him feel as powerless as I had felt when he fired me. But I was scared. Scared of the pain and the risk and the massive change coming, so I nodded. "He can stay." Dante moved to the side of the bed, careful not to touch me, just standing there like he did not know what to do with his hands. The labor was long. 12 hours of pain and fear, and moments where the monitors beeped too fast and the doctors looked concerned, and I saw Dante's face go white. Saw him understand that he might lose this. Might lose me, might lose the baby, might lose the one thing that had made him feel anything real in years, even if that feeling was obsession and rage and desperate need. They would not let him in the delivery room when it got critical. Some policy about non-family members during emergency procedures. He tried to argue, actually tried to pull rank with the hospital staff, until Rebecca physically blocked him. "You have no legal authority here," she said firmly. "And honestly, Mr. Calvetti, you have done enough." I heard him in the hallway outside, heard him shouting at Marco, heard the fear in his voice when he demanded updates. And then I heard nothing because the pain was too much and the doctors were telling me to push, and the world narrowed to just this moment. Just this impossible task of bringing a child into a world that did not want him. The baby was born at 4:17 in the morning. A boy. Small but healthy, with dark hair and eyes that had not decided their color yet. They placed him on my chest and I felt something break open inside me that I did not know existed. Love. Immediate and overwhelming and terrifying. This tiny person who had not asked to be part of this mess, who deserved so much better than a criminal empire and a father who did not know how to be anything except dangerous. I held him and cried and made promises I did not know if I could keep. Promises about safety and love and a life that was more than this. They let Dante in after they cleaned the baby and checked his vitals. He stood in the doorway like he was afraid to come closer. Like this tiny infant might shatter if he breathed too hard. "Can I?" he asked again, and I nodded because I was too exhausted to fight. He moved to the side of the bed and looked down at his son with an expression I had never seen on his face. Wonder. Absolute wonder mixed with fear. "He is perfect," Dante whispered. "What are you going to name him?" I had thought about this for months. Had lists of names that felt safe and normal. But looking at this child, at the life he was born into, only one name felt right. "Salvatore," I said. "After your father." Dante's eyes snapped to mine. "Why?" "Because he deserves to know where he comes from," I said. "Even if we wish it was different." Dante reached out slowly, like he was afraid I would pull away, and touched the baby's tiny hand. Salvatore wrapped his fingers around Dante's thumb with that instinctive grip all newborns have, and I watched something fundamental shift in Dante Calvetti's face. Not redemption, not softness, but a kind of surrender. A recognition that this child was real, was his, was something he could not control or command or bend to his will. Something he would have to protect and provide for and maybe possibly love. He looked at me with those dark eyes that had once made me feel invisible. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" I asked. "For not destroying him, for letting me be here, for giving me this." I almost laughed. "You think I did this for you? You think any of this was a gift?" He shook his head. "No, I think you did what you had to do to survive, and I think I am sorry for putting you in a position where that was necessary." It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get from Dante Calvetti. And in that moment, exhausted and raw and holding our son, it was almost enough. The trustees filed the paperwork the next day. Salvatore Calvetti was registered as the second heir to the Calvetti estate. The trust was officially activated. Dante's control was officially limited. And I became, in the eyes of the law and the empire, one of the most powerful people in New Jersey. Not because I had fought for it. Not because I had schemed or planned or wanted any of this. But because I had survived long enough to give birth to a child whose blood carried legacy and consequence in equal measure. We went home 3 days later. Not to my wing of the estate, but to a suite of rooms Dante had prepared while I was in the hospital. Nursery, bedroom, sitting room, everything a new mother could need. He had hired a night nurse and a daytime nanny and a pediatrician on retainer. He had installed more security cameras and hired more guards and basically turned that entire section of the mansion into a fortress. "To protect you," he said when I saw it all. "To protect him." I looked at Dante holding boxes of diapers like he did not know what to do with them. This powerful crime boss reduced to something almost human by a 7-pound infant. "You are going to smother us," I said. He met my eyes. "I am going to keep you both alive. There is a difference." And there was. Because the threats had not stopped with Salvatore's birth. If anything, they had intensified. Rival families making moves on Calvetti territory. Members of Dante's own organization questioning his leadership. Elena's family filing emergency custody petitions for Marcos, claiming the environment was unsafe. The empire was fracturing and everyone knew it. Everyone except the 2 children who slept peacefully, unaware that their existence had created a war. Marcos met his baby brother on a Saturday morning. He stood beside the bassinet and stared down at Salvatore with serious eyes. "He is really small," Marcos observed. "He will get bigger," I said. "Are you going to keep him here?" he asked. "As long as it is safe," I said carefully. Marcos nodded. "My mom says your baby is going to take everything from me. Is that true?" I felt my heart break a little. "No, baby, that is not true. You and Salvatore are brothers. You are supposed to take care of each other, not fight over things that do not matter." Marcos considered this. "Okay," he said. And then, with the easy acceptance of children, he reached into the bassinet and let Salvatore grab his finger. "Hi, brother," he whispered. Dante was watching from the doorway. I did not know how long he had been there. When Marcos left to go play in the garden, Dante came into the room. "He is scared," he said quietly. "Of losing me, of losing his place in the family, of everything changing." "I know," I said. "My family did that to him, made him feel like love is conditional, like he has to fight for his position even with his own father." Dante sat down heavily in the chair beside the bassinet. "I do not know how to be good at this," he admitted. "At what?" "Being a father. Being anything except what my father made me." I looked at him, at this man who had destroyed my life and then rebuilt it into something I did not recognize. "Then maybe you should try being something different," I said. "For them, if not for yourself." The next few months were strange, surreal. I lived in Dante's house, raised his son, navigated the careful politics of an empire in transition. The trustees met monthly to review finances and decisions. Rebecca checked in weekly to ensure I understood my rights and options. Dante's captains watched me with barely concealed resentment. And through it all, Dante circled, not threatening anymore, not cold or dismissive, but present, constantly obsessively present. He worked from home more than he ever had, took meetings in the library instead of his office downtown, found excuses to stop by the nursery at odd hours, watched me feed Salvatore, change him, rock him to sleep, watched like he was trying to memorize something he was afraid he would lose. "Sophia," he said one night when I was walking the hallways with a fussy baby at 2 a.m, "we need to talk." I kept walking, kept bouncing Salvatore gently. "So talk." "Not here," he said. "Tomorrow, in my office, after you put him down for his nap." It was not a request. It was never really a request with Dante. But there was something in his voice that made me nervous, something final. I showed up at his office the next afternoon with my heart pounding. Rebecca was there. So was his lawyer. So was a woman I did not recognize, someone professional and cold who introduced herself as a family court mediator. "Sit down," Dante said, and I did because my legs suddenly felt weak. "What is this?" I asked. "This," Rebecca said, "is a proposal for a formal custody and guardianship arrangement, one that protects your rights and Salvatore's interests." I looked at Dante. "Why now? Why bring in mediators and lawyers 6 months after he was born?" "Because I need you to understand that I am serious," Dante said. "About what?" "About keeping you both safe, about doing this right, About he paused, and I saw something flicker in his eyes that looked almost like pain. About making sure you never feel trapped again. The mediator laid out the proposal. Joint legal custody with primary physical custody to me. Unlimited access for Dante, but no overnight visits without my permission until Salvatore was 2. Financial support structured through the trust so I would never be dependent on Dante's goodwill. Legal protections ensuring I could leave the estate anytime I wanted, live anywhere I chose, make my own decisions about my life and my son's upbringing. It was everything I should have wanted. Everything that would have meant freedom. So why did it feel like another kind of trap? You can think about it, Rebecca said gently. You do not have to decide today. But I was looking at Dante, at the careful blankness in his face that I had learned to read over these months. The blankness that meant he was terrified I would say yes. Terrified I would take Salvatore and leave, and he would lose the one thing that had made him feel human. What do you want? I asked him directly. Everyone else in the room went quiet. What do you actually want, Dante? He met my eyes. I want you to stay. Why? Because Salvatore needs stability. Because Marcus is attached to you. Because trustees and the rival families and everyone else will see it as weakness if you leave. I shook my head. That is not what I asked. I asked what you want, not what is strategic, not what is best for the Empire. What do you want? The silence stretched so long I thought he would not answer. Then, so quietly I almost did not hear it, I want you to want to stay. There it was. The truth underneath all the control and obsession and surveillance. Dante Calvetti, who had spent his entire adult life commanding loyalty through fear, wanted me to choose him. Wanted me to stay not because I was trapped, but because I wanted to. And the tragedy was that some broken part of me understood. Some part that had been dismissed and discarded and erased understood what it meant to need someone who had all the power to destroy you. I stood up. I need time, I said. To think, to figure out what is best for Salvatore, for me. How much time? The lawyer asked. As much as I need, I said, and walked out before anyone could argue. I did not leave that night, or the next week, or the next month. Not because I could not. The legal protections were real. Rebecca had made sure of that. But because leaving meant uprooting Salvatore from the only home he had known. Meant taking Marcus's brother away. Meant navigating a world that was just as dangerous outside Dante's protection as inside it. And maybe because some part of me had started to see past the man who had fired me to the man who stood in doorways at midnight, too afraid to knock. The man who held his son with shaking hands like he might break him. The man who had given me all the legal power to leave and was terrified I would use it. This story will teach you a powerful lesson. Never underestimate someone based on where they started. Never assume the person serving you is less intelligent than you. And never, ever speak freely in front of someone you have dismissed as insignificant. Because Sophia Reyes had been invisible for 2 years. And in that invisibility she had learned everything, had seen everything. Had become the one person who could destroy Dante Calvetti without lifting a finger. All she had to do was walk away. But she did not. 6 months became a year. Salvatore started walking, started talking, started calling Dante Dada with absolute trust. Marcos spent more time at the estate, asking if he could share a room with his brother, building the kind of bond Dante had never had with his own siblings. The trustees reported that the empire had stabilized under the new structure. Surprisingly, impossibly, it was working. Not the way Dante had planned. Not with absolute control and unchecked power, but with something that looked almost like balance. And through it all, Dante watched me. Not with anger anymore. Not even with obsession exactly. With something quieter. Something that looked like gratitude mixed with fear. Fear that I would wake up one day and realize I did not have to stay. That I could take Salvatore and the legal protections and the financial security and build a life somewhere, far from New Jersey and crime families and men who did not know how to love anything they could not control. He never said it out loud. Never asked me again why I stayed. But I saw it in the way he looked at me across the dinner table. In the way his voice softened when he said my name. In the way he had stopped treating me like a problem to be managed and started treating me like something precious. Something he did not deserve but desperately needed. One night, when Salvatore was 14 months old, I found Dante in the nursery. just sitting in the rocking chair in the dark, watching his son sleep. I should have left, should have given him privacy, but something made me stay in the doorway. "You are going to wake him if you keep staring like that," I said quietly. Dante did not turn around. "I am trying to memorize this," he said. "Before it changes, before he gets old enough to understand what I am, what this family is, what I have made him part of." I moved into the room, sat on the floor beside the chair. "He is going to love you anyway," I said. "You are his father. He does not have a choice." Dante finally looked at me. "Everyone has a choice, Sophia. You taught me that." The next morning he asked me to marry him. Not romantically. There were no flowers or speeches or promises of love. Just a conversation in his office with his lawyer present and a prenuptial agreement already drafted. "For legal protection," he said. "For Salvatore's sake. So there are no custody battles if something happens to me. So you have legal standing in the family. So everyone knows you are not just," he paused, "not just someone I used and discarded." I stared at the papers on his desk. "This is not a proposal," I said. "This is a business arrangement." "Yes," he agreed. "And if I say no?" "Then nothing changes," he said. "You stay if you want to stay. You leave if you want to leave. This just makes the paperwork cleaner." I should have said no. Should have seen it for what it was, another way to bind me to him, to make me permanent in a way that served his interests. But I thought about Salvatore growing up with the stigma of illegitimacy in a world that cared about such things. Thought about the legal protections a marriage would provide. Thought about Dante's face when he admitted he wanted me to want to stay, and I said yes. Not because I loved him. Not because I had forgiven him for firing me, for trying to erase me, for all the ways he had hurt me, but because this was survival. This was strategy. This was taking every piece of power he offered and turning it into armor for myself and my son. We were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the estate. Just family, which meant Marcos as ring bearer and Rebecca as witness and Dante's captain standing in the back looking like they were at a funeral. I wore a simple white dress I had bought myself. Dante wore a suit that probably cost more than a car. And when the officiant asked if I took this man, I looked at Dante Calvetti and saw past the Mafia boss to the broken, desperate man underneath. The man who had fired his pregnant maid and then spent 1.5 years trying to undo that mistake. The man who had given me all the power to destroy him and trusted me not to use it. "I do," I said, and I meant it. Not as a promise of love, but as an acknowledgement of the strange, twisted bond we had forged. The chain that bound us together, made of blood and trust and mutual need. The wedding night was strange. We had not been intimate since before I got pregnant. Had not even discussed what this marriage would mean beyond legal paperwork. Dante stood in the doorway of my room, this room that was now technically our room even though he had never spent a night there, and looked at me like he was waiting for permission. "You do not have to," I started, and he shook his head. "I know," he said, "but I want to, if you want to." And the tragedy was that I did. Not because I had forgiven him. Not because any of this was healthy or right or anything except deeply damaged. But because I understood him now in ways I had not before. Understood that his obsession with control came from fear. That his cruelty came from self-preservation. That underneath the violence and power he was just a man who had never learned how to want something without destroying it. So I let him stay. Let him touch me with a gentleness that surprised us both. Let him whisper things in the dark that sounded almost like apologies, almost like confessions, almost like love. And in the morning, when he was still there, still holding me like he was afraid I would disappear, I understood what we had become. Not husband and wife in any traditional sense. Not lovers rebuilding trust. But two people trapped together by choices we had made and consequences we had not anticipated. Two people who had hurt each other and been hurt and were now trying to build something that did not destroy us both. It was not a happy ending. It was not even a good ending. But it was our ending, and that was enough. Are you still here? Have you stayed with me through this entire impossible journey? Then you understand. You understand that some stories do not have heroes and villains. Some stories just have people making terrible choices and living with the consequences. Subscribe if you have not already. Leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. Because this story, this strange, dark, twisted story of power and obsession and survival is far from over. Sophia Reyes started as a maid who cleaned blood off marble floors. She became the wife of a Mafia boss, the mother of his heir, the woman who held his empire in her hands. And Dante Calvetti learned the hardest lesson of his life. That the person you dismiss as insignificant might be the only person who can save you, or destroy you. And sometimes those two things are exactly the same.